everybody. We are here this week telling part 3 of our 4-part story about how the pharmacy got its start. So we're going to walk through and show you guys some of the places and things that we did that got us started. But if you remember last week, we left off with leaving the doctor's office, and while I was there, Peggy sent us a text saying, basically, you have to come harvest this kale tonight. So Robbie, he went back to work. I went home and started to get everything ready that I thought I would need to harvest all this kale. So we didn't have anything to like put the kale in. We had some Office Depot like file boxes. So I had about like 20 of these boxes that we loaded up. We had some bags, I got scissors. I put on my farm clothes and just basically went to go get all this kale, which I was like, I don't know what exactly I'm doing, but we're gonna show up and get it. So I showed up at the farm, and the row of kale that I wound up harvesting, it's huge. It was, I would say, probably like 60 or 80 feet long, which for one person to try to harvest the whole thing is ridiculous. But so I showed up there, had my supplies, and I started harvesting, and I was picking all this kale. And then literally as I'm standing there, if you remember from last week, the prophetic word that I got from the guy at the eye doctor was that you've been sowing seeds and you're going to reap a harvest. And so I was sitting there harvesting this kale, and I was like, literally look up this guy, I'm like, this is so stinking literal. Like, it was ridiculous how literal it was that I'm like standing here harvesting all this kale unexpectedly on this evening. It was like an overcast day, and so it was like the perfect weather to be out there harvesting in the evening, because normally you'd want to do all that in the morning. But anyway, so I harvested as much kale as I possibly could, and I even ended up pulling up probably around like 15 kale plants, because they were like so beautiful and so nice, and I was like, I have to save some of the plants. So I pulled them up. I didn't even have pots, so I put them like in grocery bags. Anyway, so I ended up with like 19 boxes, Office Depot file boxes full of kale. And Robbie came and met me. We ended up like loading it all up, going home. And once we got home, we packed it all away into as much refrigerated space as we could find at our place, and we took some of it to some empty refrigerators at Robbie's work. And then we're like, okay, now we have all this kale, what in the world are we going to do with it? Like, we had really no idea, except we just wanted to be sure to save it. So the next morning I called the Winter Garden Farmers Market. Actually, I didn't call, I emailed the Winter Garden Farmers Market because they didn't have like a phone number that I could call. So I emailed the Winter Garden Farmers Market and told them that, you know, I'd been working for a local farm. We had a surplus of kale. We needed to bring it to the market if we could. And they called me back like 10 minutes later, and they pretty much told me, like, you know, it takes a little bit longer to get into the market, but given that we already had the produce and everything, if I sent them like the pictures and told them what we were going to be doing, that they would get us in that weekend. So it was like, hallelujah, we were going to have something to do with this kale, somewhere to put it. But then we were left with the duty of trying to figure out how to do a farmer's market, which we've never done before. Didn't have a tent, didn't have like a table, anything. So we borrowed everything we needed. We borrowed a tent, borrowed a table, borrowed even tablecloths. We had some salvage fence panels that we made into like our first ever pharmacy sign. And so we took that, and then like about a day before the farmer's market, I bundled up all the kale, bagged up a bunch of baby kale, potted the plants that I had pulled up. And then that night I was like laying there in bed, I'm like, we're completely crazy. We've done all this work, done all this stuff. We have no idea what we're doing. I mean, not marketed at all, because we don't even know. We've never done this before. So I'm like, what if nobody shows up? We've done all these like days and days of work and preparation. But anyway, I prayed about it, and I was like, whatever, we'll see what happens. I just went to bed, woke up the next morning, and then we went to the farmer's market, set up our first little stand, which was, you know, simple and modest to say the least. It was super cute though. At the market, basically we had just kale. We had like the kale bundles, we had the little baby kale bags, we had pots of kale, and then we also had a few other little things, like Peggy and Roger had harvested for us like some onions and carrots and just a handful of little things. So we're like, oh, we'll see how that goes. So our offerings were there, and then, you know, people just started to show up. And as people are coming up to the market stand, you know, we're getting so excited because we're starting to actually sell this stuff. And people start asking us like, oh, are you here every week? And we're honestly, we're like, we have no idea. We've never done this before. We don't know if we're coming back. This is just like, we're here today. This is all we know. So we did have an email list going, and we were getting people's emails and, you know, trying to make sure that if we did come back, we could stay in touch with them that way. So come the end of the day, we ended up selling out completely of all the kale. Like, I mean, every last little kale leaf that we had was sold. All the plants sold. And I remember even one of the guys that was across from us, he was like, good thing you guys didn't do well today, or something. He had some comment because he could see clearly we sold everything. It was amazing. And we went home that day and we made like $300 profit because we didn't have to pay for any of the produce, and well, except for the things that Peggy and Roger had harvested for us. And we took that money and then we were like, well, let's kind of roll it into it and see if we can keep it going, because we don't really know what we're doing, but we were really excited. We're like, let's try again next week. Let's take that money, buy more produce from Peggy and Roger's farm, and do it again. So basically that's how it got started, and which we're coming right up on where we had our very first market stand. So whenever we get there, I'll show you guys right where it's at. But we ended up going back to the market the second week. We had just produce again. We sold the produce. So we did that for a couple of weeks, and then come the second week, Peggy and Roger told us that they had something that might be exciting news for us. So it turned out that Dale, the owner of Lake Meadow Naturals Farm in Ocoee, he was looking for somebody to take over bringing his stuff to the farmers market, because they have like locally raised meats, like chicken and beef, and eggs is their main thing that they do. So they were looking for somebody to take over doing that at the farmers market for them. And it just so happened that we were just starting this thing out, and so he was like, oh, maybe they would do it for us too. And so they asked us to bring the meats to the market, and we were like, sure, I guess we can do that. We don't know what we're doing up to this point anyway, but why not? Let's just bring some meats, bring some eggs. So if you guys just peek for just a second, we'll walk over here now that no cars are coming. This is right where we had our very first ever stand for the pharmacy. It was right about here. And the farmers market was a lot smaller at that point. So like we were on the very end of the market because it didn't really extend much further past this. So our first little stand ever was right here. We had our little blue tent. And then a couple weeks after that, we had a little stand that went right along these trees right here on this like little sidewalk area. But then once we added in the meats and eggs and things from Lake Meadow Naturals, they had to relocate us. So we had to add on a second tent. And that was because, I guess, part of the regulations, if you have like different products and things, they considered it different, even though it was from different farms, it was still different products. So we had to have a second tent that we popped up. And then we ended up right over here off of Tremaine Street. So we were off Tremaine Street for a long time, but it was kind of like a hidden spot, and it was hard for customers to find us. But over there is really where we kind of built up our customer base. So we can walk, if you want to walk over this way. So while we were in this area, even though it was kind of hidden, we still wound up with mainly a supply problem, because we would sell out of all the produce that we brought by like 11 a.m. Like people would come and just bombard our tent and it would all be gone. And so we were like desperately looking for other local farms that we could source from, but I found out pretty quickly that they're like pretty much not only just hard to find, but like at that point non-existent. Like I could not find very, if any, local farms that we could get more produce from. So it was really disheartening, because I was like, well, you know, we have like this produce from here, but it's not enough to keep us, like you couldn't make enough money off of that amount of produce to keep coming back every week. There wasn't like, you couldn't even make a profit because you would just sell out of everything before you had covered even your expenses. So we started like reaching out and trying to find more farms, and to no avail. And so I had actually been writing down all my prayers at that point in a prayer journal. And I remember praying like and asking specifically for God to like bring us farmers. And literally while I was writing out that prayer, we got an email from a local farmer that I hadn't even contacted, just out of nowhere. She had a surplus of like some lettuce and other things, and then she was like wanting to find somewhere to sell it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, okay, maybe we should keep doing this. So basically from there, one thing led to another. We ended up getting more local farms that were like wanting to sell us some produce, or somebody would hear about us, and you know, one thing would lead to another. We would wind up with more farms. We wound up finding our raw milk farmer, who we used for several years. So we had a lot of synergy from all these small little local farms selling all their stuff together, because we found out that, you know, while there's better profit margins like in selling produce, which organic and local produce is not cheap by any means, but you get better margins than you do like on the meats and eggs and things, but there's a lot of loss with produce. Meats and eggs, you know, there's less loss, so they all kind of carry each other. It's the same thing with like raw milk and with honey, and so all these things have different like shelf lives, they have different margins, and if you're doing just one, especially if it's highly perishable like produce, it's really hard to stay sustainable. So we found out that having all of these different things from all the different farmers was like, you know, having your eggs in multiple baskets, and it kept the whole thing afloat and kept all of our farmers selling more. So that worked out great until summer hit, and then we realized come the summertime that Florida summers are really crappy for growing produce. I mean, you can get a nice crop of okra and eggplant and hot peppers and things like that, but it's pretty limited with the produce availability that you can get. And so our customers that were showing up, you know, they're just there, and there's the same handful of things that are growing here locally. And I was at that point like staunchly like, we can only carry something if it's been picked like in the last 48 hours. Like we cannot have something that's not local. Like I want it to be the freshest and the best. But a really savvy customer told me, she was like, you know, I want to come shop here, but I'm not going to make a special trip here if all you've got is okra. Like if I could pick up apples or bananas or something while I was here, it would be worthwhile for me to come down here, and then I would pick up some of this local stuff while I was here. So it really opened my eyes to say, well, if I want our customers to keep shopping with us, even when it's not peak season here in Florida, then we need to offer, you know, some of this other like regular produce year round. So we ended up finding an organic supplier to supply us with like the non-local stuff, or things that are out of season, you know, like root vegetables in the summer, and like apples and things that we could never get here in Florida anyway. So once we did that, that's when we really picked up our customer base, because people could come and pretty much get all their produce that they needed with us and bypass going to, you know, Publix or Whole Foods or whatever. So once we started that, we then expanded to a 3-tent setup, which was our favorite by far, which is the one probably most of you guys remember. And when we had our 3-tent setup, we got a really sweet spot right here at the corner of Lakeville and Tremaine. So we had our little 3-corner setup right there, and it was like just such a sweet spot. Like that spot was like, it's just such a good part of my memory with how the whole setup was, how cozy it was. It would get kind of hot with the sun in the afternoon, but it was awesome as far as the setup, and that's where we picked up a lot of steam with our business, because we had a better visibility here. You know, we had the big setup, and that's whenever actually people started asking us, hey, do you guys have a brick and mortar store? Like where can we shop during the week? And we're like, no, we don't have a store, we have a farmer's market. But we started thinking, like, well, maybe we should have a storefront. Should we have a storefront? Could we have a storefront? Could we afford a storefront? I mean, because at this point, all we had was every Saturday a farmer's market stand right here. Again, that's like where we really picked up steam as far as like being able to make it sustainable. And then we decided, we're like, well, if it's this popular here during the week, maybe this is something we could do as a storefront. So at that same time, the Plant Street Market was starting to make their plans, and they were coming to Winter Garden, the Plant Street Market / Cricket Can Brewery. So we were one of the vendors that they wanted to have in the market, and so we were like super excited. We're like, yeah, we signed the lease, made the deposit. We're like, this is where we're gonna be. We're gonna have a little brick and mortar shop. It's gonna be awesome. We'll have a presence. People can shop during the week. And a couple of months before we were supposed to start our build out, we got word that they were bringing in a butcher to the Plant Street Market, which we thought was going to be cool, but then we realized there's a non-compete there, and so it wasn't going to work out for us to be able to bring our meats, which were a big part of our business. And so we just realized, we're like, you know what, this is not going to be the place where we can have our business thrive here, because we have to have all the different things working together in synergy. So we met with the market managers at the Plant Street Market. They ended up giving our deposit back to us, and you know, it was like a really cool thing, because while we were kind of disappointed and disheartened that we weren't going to be going into the Plant Street Market as we thought we were like, well, you know, if this wasn't what God had planned for us, we want to really just see what it is. We don't know, but we believe if we're supposed to have a spot, something will happen. You know, we're not going to lose hope. We had been kind of looking around all of Winter Garden and nothing was popping up, but we believed that, you know, Winter Garden is where we wanted to be and where we would end up. So we were just like, well, we don't know what we're going to do, but we're moving forward anyway. So fast forward several weeks past that. That was around like October of 2014. And around like, I would say January or February, we had a really nice gentleman come up to our farmer's market stand. He bought a few things, checked out, and as he was checking out, he said, so I hear you guys may be looking for a place. And that is basically where we're gonna pick up next week, because we had a really interesting conversation with him, and it led to some other things. So we're gonna fill you guys in on that. And we hope you guys enjoyed this portion of our story. Next week will be part 4. It'll be the last part of our series. And you'll hear like the grand finale of where we're at, what we're doing now, and who's working with us. So we appreciate you guys watching all of this, and stay tuned for next week's part 4.